Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC 169 Barao versus Faber 2. My quick initial thoughts overall of the card. I think the main card is great. Prelim card, not too much I'm excited for. Some scrubs, some guys never really heard of. But the main card, obviously the two title fights, very excited for. Anytime there are two title fights on a card, that's great stuff. And then even the undercard is really good, especially that Mir and Overeem fight. But pretty big card in my opinion, a lot better than last year's Super Bowl card. But let's run through it. I'll give you my thoughts and predictions for all the fights. So starting off with the UFC Fight Pass preliminary card, at welterweight Neil Magny taking on Ghassan Umalatov. Neil Magny from Tough 16 got knocked out by Ricci in the house in the semifinals. And since coming over to the UFC, he's 1-2, I believe. Won his first fight against fellow Tough castmate John Manley, won that by decision, and then lost his next two to Sergio Moraes and Seth Baczynski. I think he's a skilled guy. He's got good reach. He's kind of a rangy striker. He's shown some good top control from Tough and also in that fight with John Manley. But his last few fights, I think he's just kind of fallen off a bit, especially against Seth Baczynski. Really didn't do much, could never really get anything working for him. Was out wrestled in that fight and even outstruck. And Seth Baczynski, mid-level guy at best. And then the Moraes fight got quickly submitted, so I haven't really seen too much from Magny in his last few fights. And Ghassan Umalatov, I can't tell you anything about him, never heard of him, but kind of tempted to go with him just because he's Russian, or I believe he's Russian, but all the Russians in the UFC have been on a roll lately, and even these newcomers coming in to the UFC, they always impress and look good. So I'm at the point where anytime there's a Russian newcomer in the UFC, I'm being Russian alone is gonna catch my attention. So Neil Magny, he's a guy I know here. Normally I would probably take Magny. We've seen him fight a few times. But I don't know. I think I'm gonna have to take Umalatov again. I just think these Russians, they got something special going on, and I'm taking Umalatov. Next up at lightweight, Tony Martin versus Rashid Magomedov. Again, two newcomers, two guys I don't know anything about, but again, Magomedov, Russian fighter. Pulling up his record here, it looks like he's on a big win streak, 8-fight win streak. He's got a few decisions and 4 decisions and 4 finishes in that 8-fight win streak. So yeah, looks like he's been doing pretty well. I can't say much about the competition in Russia. Don't know much about it, but again, another Russian guy. I'm tempted to pick him just because he's Russian. I'll say Magomedov. Next up, last fight on the Fight Pass prelim card, at middleweight, Clint Hester taking on Andy Enns. Clint Hester, this guy, he's a lab specimen, huge, athletic, and a very talented striker. He has really nasty striking. He won his last 2 fights in the UFC against tough vets Bristol Marunde and Dylan Andrews. Last fight with Andrews, he dislocated his shoulder, but he was doing well in that fight. And the guy's just super athletic. Obviously, has a big hole with his ground game. We saw that exposed in the Tough House when he lost to Jimmy Quinlan in a fight he was just dominating, but just got taken down once, and that was the end of it. But I think Hester is a special guy, and I think he's developing pretty well. His takedown defense also seems to be improving. He did get taken down by Andrews a few times in their fight, but I also remember him stuffing a few of them. And Andy Enns, I believe he's the guy who fought Uriah Hall in the preliminary fights and Tough to get into the house. And Uriah Hall, as I remember, didn't finish him in that fight, and that was the only fight he didn't finish in his run in the Tough House, getting to the finale. And I remember that, Enns was getting dominated, but he hung in there, and he was tough and fighting hard. But even knowing that, I have to go with Hester. He's just a big, strong, athletic guy with a lot of talent and very, very dangerous striking. Now on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card. And I do think Hester will finish Enns, by the way. First round. TKO. On to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card at lightweight. Al Raging Bull Iaquinta versus Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee, newcomer. Looks like he's on a 6-fight win streak. Hasn't fought anybody of note. But Iaquinta had that long layoff after losing to Chiesa in the Tough finale from Tough 15. And then his last 2 fights, late last year when he came back, took on Ryan Couture, really dominated him, showed some pretty solid boxing, and then beat Piotr Hallman in a fight that was a lot tougher. I believe in that fight I scored the first round for Hallman. And then Iaquinta kind of took over, had his moments later in that fight. But in both those fights, the Couture and the Hallman fight, I didn't really see the killer instinct, real finishing ability of Iaquinta. I think in the Tough House, he had a few finishes there. I remember he finished Andy Ogle, and that was his only finish, I think. But he had obviously a lot easier time in the Tough House. And in the UFC, I see talent, solid fundamental boxing. Showed against Ryan Couture and Piotr Hallman. He was able to get the takedown, get grappling control, a few spots there, and rain down some strikes. But I haven't really seen that killer instinct, and I think if he's going to lose to anyone, I think that's going to be what hurts him. Doesn't really... he's pretty fights at the same pace kind of throughout his fight. Never really just turns it on and goes for the finish. But I still think he's going to win here just because Kevin Lee looks like he only has 6 fights on his record. So I'm going to go with Iaquinta. Has the UFC experience, and he's looked decent so far. So I'm going to take Iaquinta. Next up at middleweight, Nick Catone taking on Tom Kong Watson at middleweight. I like Catone here. Catone's been one of these guys. I think he could have gotten a lot more done in the UFC, but he hasn't been too active. Since 2010, the guy's only had 4 fights. This is his 5th fight since 2010, so really hasn't been... he's been pretty inactive. Lost his last 2 fights to TJ Waldberger and Chris Camozzi. Was winning both of those fights. He was really dominating Waldberger with the wrestling. Catone's a strong wrestler, He's able to get guys down, and he's pretty heavy on top. Works ground and pound. But Waldberger ended up submitting him with a triangle. But that was, in that fight, he was fighting at welterweight, and I remember that being a very hard cut for him. I think he was sick afterwards. In the fight before that against Camozzi, he was also winning that fight, winning the first 2 rounds, having a pretty easy time getting Camozzi down and working ground and pound, but that fight was stopped due to a cut in the 3rd round. I remember that. And before that, he has a win over Costa Philippou, Jesse Forbes. That's going far back though. But Catone, a strong wrestler, and Tom Kong Watson in his last fight badly out-grappled, out-wrestled by Talis Leites. I think his most impressive performance was against Stanislav Nedkov. Got the finish there. But he's lost to Brad Tavares and Talis Leites in the UFC and really seemed incompetent on the ground against Leites, and Catone being a really hard-nosed wrestler, I think he's going to expose that all day long against him, and I'm going to go with Catone, possibly by finish, but probably decision. Unless Watson just turns it on the feet and is able to do that before Catone can really implement his wrestling. I could see a case there where Watson could get the finish on the feet, but over 3 rounds, I definitely think Catone's going to get that takedown over and over. Next up at flyweight, Chris Carriazo versus Danny Martinez. Carriazo's been in the UFC for several years now. Had a bit of a win streak at one point, a 3-fight win streak. However, I thought he lost a few of those fights against Mitsugaki and Ferguson. I actually thought, his opponent, definitely the Mitsugaki fight was a big robbery. And then the Ferguson fight, another tough veteran from Tough. He was from Tough 15. I actually thought Ferguson looked a lot better than him in that fight. Really, his only, and then he lost to John Moraga and Jussier Formiga. His really only impressive performance, I thought, was against Von Lee, and then obviously his last fight against Iliardi Santos, which was his first fight at flyweight. He was getting a beating put on him in that last fight. Santos he hurt him on the feet. I believe he took him down and hurt him, but then Carriazo just came back in that 2nd round, turned it on, and was able to get the finish on the feet against Santos. So a really tough guy, and that was his first finish in the UFC in several fights. Yeah, that last fight was actually his first finish in 8 fights in the UFC. So I think at flyweight he brings some power, and he might have some finishing power he didn't have at bantamweight. And Danny Martinez, again, another guy I don't know anything about. He's on a 4-fight win streak. Hasn't beaten anyone that I've heard of. He has a loss to Formiga also, and a loss to Benavidez. I'm going to go with Carriazo. He's got a lot of UFC experience. He's been here for several years. He's had a lot of fights go the distance, a lot of experience, so I'm taking Carriazo. Next out of lightweight, John the Bull Makdessi versus Alan Patrick. Alan Patrick knocked out Garrett Whiteley very quickly in his last fight in the 1st round. Both guys were UFC newcomers. He seemed pretty, capable on the feet. Seemed like the knockout came pretty easily to him. Seemed like a talented striker. But Makdessi has been in the UFC for several years, about 3 years now, and actually almost 4 years, but he's on a big win streak right now. Beat Sam Stout, Darren Cruikshank, and Hene Forte. Knocked out Forte in his last fight. a really talented kickboxer, talented striker. Against Cruikshank, I thought Cruikshank was going to be able to keep him at distance, but Makdessi really took control of that fight and was really able to get inside pretty easily against Cruikshank. The Sam Stout fight, I actually remember scoring that for Sam Stout, but he still looked pretty good there. And then Forte, again, he finished him in his last fight. He did hit him in the back of the head, but it wasn't really his fault. It was the way Forte would, turned his head as he was trying to avoid the strike. And he also has losses to Dennis Hallman and Anthony Njokuani. The Njokuani fight, he wasn't able to get inside, but Njokuani's a really tall guy. But Makdessi, very talented striker, developing well. Alan Patrick showed good power, though, in his last fight. And obviously to UFC fans like me, he's still pretty unknown, so I have to go with Makdessi. I think he's developing well. He's on a good win streak here. Patrick, though, again, showed some pretty good power, and he might have a power advantage on Makdessi. I don't know, but I have to go with Makdessi for the UFC experience. Now on to the main card. Lightweight, Jamie Varner versus Abel Trujillo. I'm taking Trujillo. I haven't been the biggest believer in this guy. I think he was pretty overhyped. He had such a dominant performance coming in the UFC against Marcus Levasseur, but I thought Levasseur had looked pretty disappointing and was probably one of the lowest level skilled fighters in the UFC at that time. And Jamie Varner obviously has way more experience at the elite level since coming back to the UFC. Had a great knockout of Edson Barboza. Got a tough decision win over Gallard, but then dropped fights to Joe Lozon and Gleison Tibau. And especially in the Tibau fight, his last fight, was just out-wrestled and just held down by Tibau, and then turned it on until the third round, where he really came alive and really won the third round dominantly. Was able to get on top of Tibau, and he was really going for that finish. But those first two rounds, he just seemed like he didn't have that drive, and Tibau was able to just hold him down. And I don't know. I think if Varner, kind of looks that way, comes in a little lackadaisical, not really engaging from the first round. I think Trujillo's just going to be all over him. Trujillo really, I think, kind of redeemed himself in his last fight. That first fight with Roger Bowling, up to the point of the illegal knee. He wasn't looking too great. He had his moments. Definitely, I think he was hurting Bowling more than Bowling was hurting him. But Bowling was definitely winning on points. I thought Bowling was starting to pull away in that fight. He was getting the takedown, and he was also landing a few uppercuts, snapping Trujillo's head back. I remember in that fight. But in that last fight, right out of the gate, went after Bowling, showed that super high level athleticism he has, took Bowling down, really beat him up with the striking, put him up against the fence, and used those brutal knees to the body that he likes to do. And I think Varner, especially again his last fight, he lost to Gleison Tibau. Tibau really out-muscled him, outsized him, and I think Varner's going to be a little too small here for Trujillo as well. If Trujillo can just implement his wrestling and hold Varner up against the cage. Varner, I think, is the more skilled striker, a far more skilled striker. In that Lozon fight, his striking looked great. He was hopping around a lot, moving around. Lozon couldn't tie up with him. Varner was going to the body, and and mixing up his boxing very well. But didn't really do that in the Gallard fight, and didn't do that against Tebow again. I just think Trujillo, coming off such a strong performance, I think he's got a lot of momentum right now, and I think it might be his time to get a big win over an established guy. I'm taking Trujillo here. Next up at flyweight, John Hands of Stone Lineker versus Ali Bagautinov. I like Lineker. I'll say that from the start. I like Lineker to win this fight. Obviously, I think his ground game has been untested in the UFC, and Bagautinov, he comes from that Russian background, and we know they have strong wrestlers over there. We haven't seen his wrestling too much in the UFC. He's only had 2 fights in the UFC. Knocked out Marcus Vinicius in his first fight, and then decision Tim Elliott, and I thought that was a really kind of breakout performance. Even though he didn't get the finish, Tim Elliott's one of these small flyweights that uses a lot of movement and is kind of hard to get your hands on. But Bagautinov really shut his game down with the striking, and I think he did take him down at least once in that fight. But Lineker, he's wild right out of the gate. He's going 100%, firing on all cylinders. That last fight against Phil Harris really impressed me, how he was going to the body with his strikes, and I believe he finished that fight with body strikes. Same thing against Jose Maria. TKO'd him early in the second round. And but against and then his fight before that against Azamat Gashimov, you can really see the progression from that fight to his last fight with Phil Harris. The way he throws his hands against Gashimov, he really looked kind of stiff, kind of throwing a lot of haymakers. And then against Phil Harris, his striking looked very clean, great hand speed, and his technique just looked vastly improved. So I think he's really improving. He does have trouble making that weight. I believe he's missed it 3 times in the UFC, which is pretty bad. And I think he should have been penalized for that. But Bagatinov's a solid opponent. I think he's got the more complete game with the wrestling. I think his striking is more refined. But I don't know if if they get into a brawl, I don't know if Bagatinov can. I don't know if he can survive that against Lineker. Tough fight. I wouldn't be surprised if Bagatinov won. I don't think he'll knock out Lineker. I think he would probably get it done with the wrestling and probably controlling the range more. But I like Lineker here. I think he's a little too aggressive and throws at too high a volume, and he's good at making the fight a brawl. I like Lineker in this fight, and I do think he could finish Bagatinov on the feet. Next up at heavyweight, Frank Mir versus Alistair Overeem. I like Overeem to knock Frank Mir out in the first round. In his last fight against Travis Brown, he was looking really good, actually. He just, I don't know if they're mental errors, but he always seems to find a way to lose. In that Brown fight, had Brown badly hurt, and obviously Brown showed a lot of heart, but Brown was throwing that up kick. He landed that about at least 3 times on Overeem before it finally knocked him out. And then the fight against Bigfoot Silva was really dominating that with the wrestling and the ground and pound. And then Silva and Overeem just seemed to stop. I don't know if it's a cardio issue, a mental lapse that he seems to have in all his fights, but it just seems like he always lets his opponent back in the fight after he's dominating them. Frank Mir, on the other hand, I don't think Frank Mir's been in top form since maybe the time he fought Congo. And I know that was way back, but I really mean that. He was on a 3-fight win streak at one point with a KO of Mirko Cro Cop. Then he had a decision win over Nelson and submitted Big Nog. But in the Roy Nelson fight, really gassed. In the Cro Cop fight, not much. That was a very boring fight, heavily criticized, and was able to get the knee right at the end. And then against Big Nog, nearly got knocked out before pulling off the submission. And then now he's on a 3-fight losing streak. Dos Santos knocked him out. No shame there. But then the fight against Cormier, it was a big deal about him going to Jackson's and Greg Jackson's camp and getting in shape, but he just wasn't willing to. It seemed like he didn't really want to turn it on at any point and go for the kill, and Cormier was able to just hold him up against the fence and really restrict his movement, and very lackluster fight. And then against Josh Barnett, I think that fight was really telling. Went out there, engaged right from the get-go. There was a wild exchange, but Barnett was able to again press him up against the fence and then land work strikes and land that knee that put him down. I think Mir's just at the end of his career. I think his last few fights has just kind of been hanging on. He's terrible against the fence. He always gets pushed up there against the fence and held there. That's how he lost to Shane Carwin. I think he's a pretty bad wrestler at heavyweight. Obviously very good with his submissions once he gets on the ground, but as a wrestler, not very good. And his striking, everyone made such a big deal that first time he fought Nogueira and he was able to knock him out. I agree that he was very impressive with his striking, but never threw his hands in the same way again. He had that knockout or that knockdown of Congo before he finished him, but really since then, in the fight against Roy Nelson, his striking just looked completely different. The Mirko Cro Cop fight, and then his last few fights against Cormier and Dos Santos, he just seemed really unwilling to strike, very desperate to, dive for legs, get the fight on the ground somehow. But striking, I don't think he has anything for Overeem. I think if Mir wins this fight, it's just going to be another huge mental error that Overeem makes. I think Overeem's just too big and strong, way too good of a striker for Mir, and I think Mir's just really at the end. I think this is his last fight, and while Overeem definitely, the way he lost his last two fights was very bad, I definitely think there's still the potential for him there to turn it around because he was dominating those fights before he lost. So I'm going with Overeem, first round knockout. Now, next up, the co-main event, Jose Aldo versus Ricardo Lamas for the featherweight belt. This fight's just been flying under the radar for me, with all of these fights and shows that the UFC puts on now. It's hard to kind of, there's no time to really build up to these big fights, and especially because this fight's the co-main event, even though it's the heavier weight, and the UFC usually goes with the heavier weight for the main event when there are two title fights. This fight's the co-main event, and I think it's just been really flying under the radar, and that's too bad because while I'll pick Aldo to win, I think Ricardo Lamas is the toughest opponent as far as resume and skill set goes that Aldo has faced in a while. Lamas isn't going to be scared Chad Mendez, a super talented guy, a guy I think would beat Ricardo Lamas. When he fought Aldo, he was scared. It's very clear. You could just see it. Very tentative. Um, he got that waist lock on Aldo and was just hanging on there, desperate to drag the fight to the ground. Didn't want to open up with his striking. I'm talking about Mendez. And Ricardo Lamas isn't going to do any of that. He's going to go in there and just he's going to get in Aldo's face. However, I just think Aldo's too good. Aldo, though, he's probably my least favorite champion. He's so inconsistent with the way he fights. Sometimes he goes in there, kills guys in the first round. Other times he just drags fights out. That last fight with Korean Zombie, I thought was just horrible. It was like a feeling out process for the whole fight, and then Aldo was winning, but I feel like Aldo can finish all these guys in the first round, and he doesn't. Frankie Edgar in that fight, I scored that fight for Edgar, I believe, but really a toss up, and Aldo's oftentimes very strong in that first round, and then gasses. We saw that with Mark Hominick in their fight. I do think Lamas will have the cardio advantage, and I really, again, I'm picking Aldo. Part of me feels like if Lamas just rushes in there and tries to push the pace, I feel like Aldo's just gonna kill him, catch him with something like Chad Mendez when he finally went in for that takedown. Aldo just threw that knee, knocked him out. He has incredible timing and speed like that. I also feel like if Aldo just wants to be methodical and kind of hang around and not get down to business right from the start of the fight, I feel like Lamas could just totally overwhelm him and really, rough him up and get right in his face, make it a real war of attrition. And Lamas, he has that one, the fight that really stands out to me, and the fight they ignored very conveniently ignored on the countdown, was the fight against Hatsu Hioki. I actually scored that fight for Hioki. Lamas got the win, but that was a real close fight, and Lamas spent way too much time on his back in that fight. Really won because he kept going for the guillotine choke while he was on his back, even though Hioki got out of it several times. And with it, he struggled against Hioki like that. I can't take him here against Aldo, even though he really had a great showing against Coke last fight and really brutalized him, finished him early in that fight. Just got one takedown and it was over. His ground and pound was that good. But I just think Aldo's too athletic, too good, has very lethal striking and timing, when he wants to attack. I can see Lamas winning it, though. I can. I just think Aldo's too good. I'm gonna go with Aldo. I think Lamas is gonna try to just kind of really push the action in the first round, and I think he's gonna pay for it. Aldo's gonna counter him, so I'm going with Aldo. Finish early in the first or second round, but again, Lamas is super tough. I think he's really gonna fight Aldo like nobody has since Mark Hominick, and but I don't think he's gonna get it done. In the main event, Renan Barao versus Uriah Faber. Second fight, the rematch. The first fight, Barao dominated with the striking. Faber could never get anything going, never got any striking going, and didn't come close with any takedown attempts. But Barao didn't really seem to hurt Faber either in that first fight. Really dominating kind of as a point fighting context, but didn't seem really close to finishing Faber either. However, I think Barao's just improved a lot since then. Faber too, but Barao, very impressive performances had the finish against McDonald. And he was tested in that fight against McDonald. McDonald dropped him early on with striking, but Barao came back, really took his time, picked apart McDonald on the feet, and then was able to get that submission. Eddie Wineland, people say Eddie Wineland won that first round against Barao, but it's really like, who cares? It doesn't matter. They were really feeling each other out in that first round. Wineland maybe landed a few more strikes, but then Barao, you just see the athleticism and those the precision of those unorthodox techniques. The spinning back kick to the face put Wineland down. Barao is very talented. He's incredible, very athletic. Uriah Faber, on the other hand, has had an amazing year. 4 fights after losing to Barao. 2 finishes against 2 top 10 guys in the division. Finished Jorgensen. Finished Menjivar too, but I think that was kind of a big kind of mismatch. Beat Yuri Alcantara in a fight I thought Faber might not have been motivated for, and got put in a bad spot early in that fight and was able to really outwork Alcantara. And then his last fight against Michael McDonald, I think he just jumped up to a whole different level. McDonald, one of these guys I was really high on, and I thought he was kind of going to overtake Faber and kind of take his spot in the division. Much younger guy, but Faber completely dominated him. It was beautiful to see how he set up the finish. His striking, his timing, the way through those big overhand rights, and was able to land them and really picked his shots very carefully. He looked phenomenal in that fight and then got the finish. McDonald never was able to get anything off on Faber. With all that being said, though, well, let me say, if Faber had a full camp for this, I'd say it's a toss-up because Faber's just looks so good. And Faber really beat McDonald, had a much easier time, much more dominant performance against him than Barao did. I know that's MMA math, but still, I think that means something. And with a full camp, I think that it will look completely different than that first fight. I think it will be much more competitive. However, I'd say probably for me it would be a toss-up if Faber had a full camp to train. I believe he was in a wheelchair after that first time he fought Barao. And I just think this rematch would be completely different. Again, had Faber had the full camp to prepare, but I just think this has been a very long, active year for Faber. 4 fights. This will be his 4 fights in the calendar year, and he was taking this fight on 3 weeks' notice. I just think all that's going to work against him. 3 weeks. I know Faber's a super well-conditioned guy, always staying in shape, always in the gym, but I just think all these things are going to work against him. 3 weeks, not enough time to prepare for a guy like Barao. Both physically, I don't care what anyone says that, sometimes they argue that if you were just in camp and, coming off of a fight, jumping right back in there, you're already in shape. I don't think so. I think rest and recovery is important, and it's been a very long year for Faber. Very active. And he fights he has such a high output. All of his fights, none of them are like, KOs in the first round. Those fights were long and hard. Even the fights he won against Jorgensen was really starting to come on at one point and really kind of pushed Faber hard. Very active year for Faber, and no one's really considering this, I think. But and that's just the physical side of things. What about just game planning? Barao, he's not one of these guys you're just gonna come in and outmuscle and outwork. This guy's a very technical, very talented guy. Throws unorthodox stuff, very athletic. A guy like that, you really gotta do your homework. You see, Chris Weidman really figured out Silva. Silva's always thought to be this, this god. No one could touch him, and Chael Sonnen was able to kind of rough him up, and everyone thought all you have to do is push Silva, get in his face. No one did their homework like Weidman. He has I think he has a great team back there with Sarah and Longo, and they really took this invincible guy like Silva and broke down his game, found the holes. And I think that's how you have to beat one of these super talented champions like Aldo, or in this case Barao, in 3 weeks. I can't see how Faber is going to be prepared, game plan wise for Barao. I don't see how he's going to really be in top physical shape. Again, super active year, 4 fights. And then it was only like 3 weeks ago he got the notice for this fight. So I really admire Faber for stepping up, taking this big opportunity. I think he definitely deserved it. Had an incredible year. A lot of times guys, lose. They fight for the title, lose, fight one fight, and they're back. Win one fight and they're back in there. Faber really, I feel, especially with that last win against McDonald, reinvented himself. Definitely deserved the shot again. And again, full camp. I say Faber's got a live shot at beating Barao. I can't say that 3 weeks notice. 3 weeks notice and coming off of a fight. I got to go with Barao. Not sure how he'll get it done. I could see it playing out like the first fight again. Faber just getting stuck and Barao picking him apart with striking the whole fight, going to decision. I could see it being a brawl. Faber really getting in there, really just trying to make something happen, really engaging, and Barao just connecting with something in a brawl. I could see Barao just kind of feeling him out early on and just land something big and knocking Faber out even. But I have to go with Barao. I really love to see Faber win. I think that would just be incredible. I love the streak he's been on. I think this was a great year. But I have to go with Barao. Just doesn't make sense to me how everyone's is thinking that Faber is going to have a chance with how active he's been this year, and again just taking this fight on 3 weeks notice, and just got the fight like a month after his last fight. So I'm going with Barao. Those are my predictions for UFC 169. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. Please like the video, comment with your thoughts. Please subscribe. And check out my recap for UFC Fight Night 35, Rockhold versus Philippou, as well as my recap for UFC on Fox 10. UFC on Fox 10, Henderson versus Thompson. If you want to check those out, please do so. I'd appreciate it. Take care, you guys. I'll be back with my recap for this card shortly after Saturday, either Sunday or Monday. But thank you guys for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.